Let's talk about your juicy love with me, Una Drake. We explore relationships, dating, sacred union, communication, conscious love, healthy boundaries, and much more. As a dating and relationship coach for over 5 years, with a background in shamanic healing and metaphysical work, I've helped men and women, young and old, from all walks of life. My mission is to increase peace, joy, and love on planet Earth. So listen in and stay juicy.
Yeah, this is our juicy moment. This is me, Dr. Pat, and I get to hang out with Una Drake. Yep, this is your juicy love. Today we're going to talk about what is your oh my gosh, is your relationship toxic or just in a rough patch? This is the $64 million question, folks. You know, we have had more calls in this show about this particular dynamic, I think, than any other question we'd ever have. As a matter of fact, we had one yesterday about this question. You know, is your relationship toxic or just in a rough patch? I mean, we could be listening to that Britney Spears song, Toxic, but this is the world that Una Drake lives in. This is what she lives, she breathes. She helps people all over the world find, live, and expand your juicy love. That's what this radio show is about. It's about your juicy love. It is about bringing a message out there. So not only do you get to experience it, but if you're not experiencing it, then what can you do? And so today we're going to be talking about this dynamic. Toxic, not toxic. Which is it? Una, great to have you here today. Listen, this is your life's work. Let's stop and talk about this. This is more than just, you know, I'm going to create something. This is a calling for you. And I'm really struck by how each of us says yes to our calling. What was it about your journey that had you say, I'm gonna teach people how to create juicy love? How did you get there?
Thank you, Dr. Pat. Well, for me, it was going through my own struggles in my own, relationship history and being in what I now realize was a toxic relationship, actually a couple different toxic relationships.
No kidding. Me too, sister.
Yeah. God. And then finally finding, a relationship that, well, actually, I mean, a number of relationships that were healthy, and ultimately meeting my partner that we've been together for years and years. And, that's, the best relationship of my life. But I didn't even know that was possible. And when I was stuck in toxic relationship patterns, I just wanted love to not hurt. I just wanted it to be decent, okay, basically, oh, all right. And basically, I know how much it can hurt to stay stuck in toxic patterns and to be stuck in abusive situations. And I use that abuse doesn't even necessarily mean physical abuse. It could be, verbal abuse. It could be emotional abuse. But a love relationship, or love, I'm using quote marks here, relationship that hurts is not a situation that you want to stay in. And I think so many people, like me, you want your relationship to work out. You have this vision of how it should be. And if it's not like that, for me, I just tried and I tried and I tried and I tried. And I try to take, full responsibility. I try to change anything that I could to get there. So basically, having gone through that pattern, you ask, why is this my calling now? I feel that it's my calling to help people have really good relationships, to have juicy love, to grow through their relationship experience and to experience love the way that it can be, the way that it should be, and that you don't need to stay stuck in less than that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. Because, people ask me, why. I mean, we've been called a lot of things. The latest is we are the Disney of podcasting and podcasting radio. That's us. They've coined that phrase now. That was new. And I asked somebody why. They say because, what's happening is for thought leaders to come on this show, people like you, and to tell the story about how folks can transform their lives. That's the Disney. That's what Disney does. And then somebody asked me, why? Why, Pat? Why you? Just like I ask you. I'm somebody that battled for most of my life, battled with hard situations. And I think just like you, we can battle and become the victim of them, or we can battle and become victorious. And I think for me, just like for you, we understand what it means to be victorious. And in your case, create juicy love. Now you want to help others do that. But this topic today, finding out which one is going on, is the golden compass. It is the key to the palace. It really is. Because you got to know when to hold them and you got to know when to fold them, Una, right?
Yes, and it's very, very difficult when you're in it. It's probably the most difficult decision that I can think of. I mean, or one of them anyway. I mean, how do you there are so many benefits to, a long-term relationship, and you don't want to be a quitter. You don't want to be someone who gives up part way. And yet, if that relationship is bad for you, then you have to let go. You have to know when to make that decision, and that can be the most difficult decision of your life. You let go of everything that you've built, all of your dreams. Everything that you have invested in this relationship. For many people, that's everything. Or close to it. Except for yourself.
There's a price to pay, though. And let's talk about it. Have you been able to define toxic relationships? Because when people are in it, they need to get some help from you, because we don't see our own stuff, boy. We don't see it.
Yeah. It's so let's talk about what is a toxic relationship. Yeah. So let's talk about the word toxic. Just like a toxin, it poisons the body. A toxic relationship it's poisoned, or it poisons you when you're in that. It's like it makes you sick to stay in the relationship. And in many cases, like if you stay in a toxic relationship long enough, honestly, it does take a physical toll on you because of the stress. Yeah. And so it's a relationship that characterized by criticism, anger. Honestly, toxic relationships can take a form. It can take many, many different forms. Some are it's like a very subtle, say verbal abuse or something like that, like where you want to connect with your partner, but you feel like you're getting cut down a lot, or subtle. It can be even like subtle criticism, or it can be blowing up in your face, and even on an extreme end, like physical violence, or even women who are battered or even killed by their partners. That's obviously toxic. But I mean, it can be much a lesser degree. I say lesser degree, but I mean, it still hurts. It's still completely stressful and not a good thing to remain in a relationship where you're belittled, or you're constantly criticized, where you have to be on defensive, or you have to feel like you're walking on eggshells in that situation.
I think
And
that, what you're talking about is really very important. It is a micro of what's going on in a more global media scene. This idea of belittling people at the expense of you winning or making a point. I mean, that is a culture mark that we just can't afford to bring into our homes, our family. I mean, it is not the kind of thing you want to raise children in that environment. And yet, this notion of sticks and stones will break, sticks and stones, right, will break my bones, but names will never harm me. That is so not true.
absolutely,
That
it's
little
so
that
not true.
little childhood rhyme is so not true and is the core of toxic relationships. Now, any physical violence, that is a showstopper. You and I agree?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And it even with that, even with I'm going to say women, but any even people, partners who even
Mm-hmm.
are physically abused or threatened or you know it can still be really really difficult to recognize that and to
Mm-hmm.
disentangle. Because even with that, I'm thinking of a particular person, right now stuck in that dilemma, and I, I, this is someone close to me. It breaks my heart, but even with doing everything that I can,
Mm-hmm.
I can't help that person
Right,
disengage
right.
because they have to be there. They have to make that decision. Does that make sense?
You have to make that decision. And what it does is it opens up the door to learn a new skill called boundaries. And this isn't just about that love relationship you're in, while today's show is about that.
Mhm.
This is you also where we are willing and allowing ourselves to be part of toxic relationships that could have to do with our brothers, our sisters, our moms, our dads. And, we can see how that transfers over to our love life, where we
Yes.
feel we've never been able to draw a line in the sand and say, no, 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 don't cross that line. And yet, here we are now. We're found in that situation. When we come back from break, we're going to talk about why it is so hard to tell a toxic relationship. And I just gave a little example of why that might be. But why is it so hard? And how are some toxic relationships very different than others? Let's take a short break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the snake charmer and much more. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody, welcome back. Una Drake is in the house. I mean, Una, before we go ahead, I would love for you to tell folks how they can get some coaching from you, classes from you, all of the above. What is the best way for people to find out more about how they can create their own juicy love?
Absolutely. Well, they can go to my website, unadrake.com, UNADRAKE.com, and they can read blog posts, find out about me. They can contact me through the site. And if you're listening to the show today and you want to talk with me directly and get your own clarity session, maybe you're in a relationship and you're not sure if it's really toxic or
Oh,
if you should really just continue with it, or if there's some just maybe
mm-hmm.
minor adjustments that you
Yeah.
can make to bring that relationship really where it feels satisfying and
Uh-huh.
juicy for you,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
email me. I'm offering 5 relationship clarity sessions for anyone who calls in from the show or emails me. I encourage you to email me, una@unadrake.com, and put in the subject line clarity session, or put in
Yeah.
clarity. And any put clarity in the subject line, And
Put
I'm
whatever you
happy
want in the
to talk.
subject line. The bottom line is you got to get some help. It's funny we're talking about this because we've had a couple. I hope the folks that called in earlier this week are listening to this show. Like I'm hoping, and I cannot mention any names, but you know who you are. You called in the other day and we're talking about your relationship. I hope you're listening. And you could also call in today, 1-800-930-2819. Okay, so here's the thing. I want to talk about toxic versus abusive, and I want to talk about the confusion we have and whether or not one is better than the other. I actually heard somebody say, "Well, maybe my relationship is not great." They didn't use the word toxic. They actually used a word that's actually worse than that. But they said, at least it's not abusive. And I'm listening and I'm thinking to myself, how could like a venomous, that was the word. Like, how could you describe your relationship as venomous and think that that is like better than abusive? Well, at some level, yeah, you're not getting your face bashed in every day, but literally your soul is dying.
Yeah, absolutely. When most people hear about an abusive relationship or they hear the term, abuse, they think about physical abuse, like physical violence. But really, there are other shades, you could say, of abusive relationship, and any kind of abuse within a relationship with his, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, etc. That is all toxic.
Mm-hmm.
The other type of common toxic relationship, I would say, would be a codependent relationship, in which there's a lot of emotional entanglement and enabling of
toughest
bad behaviors.
The toughest, the hardest, the rampant in our society right now. My friend has a book that she's writing called The Rise of Narcissism. I'm like, okay. But let's talk about the other side of that, the rise of codependence, because you cannot, like people say, well, the narcissist, well, it takes those two dynamics, right? Right? I mean, the narcissist is going to find somebody that they can look at and say, oh, like she's the one, right? She's the one that I'm going to be able to do my little thing on.
They do tend to target people, absolutely.
Still
yes,
a toxic dance.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't matter how you cut it.
Yeah, narcissists and people with personality disorders that are kind of prey on their partners, they do actually tend to target really strong individuals, like really strong people who are very giving and who actually are like the strong side of the spectrum on these like really positive characteristics, because they know that those are the people that they can milk the longest, because they tend to be, if that partner gets hooked in and then stays, it's like they have more juice to give to the narcissist. And so it's like they are picking the primo targets that they can get involved with because they get the most out of it, and then they stick around. I think maybe because they don't want to give up or something, but it's bad. And
but let's talk about let's talk about codependence for a minute. And for those of you out there, every time you hear me talk about something like this, one or two of you sends me an email. And here's what I want to say. My background's in psychology, and Una said it best. We're not talking about narcissistic tendencies here, like people that are self-absorbed. We're not talking about that. We're not throwing the word around like it's being thrown away in our pop culture. From a psychological point of view, a narcissistic personality disorder is a disorder. It is a condition that is in the psychological textbooks. So we're not talking about your friend that is out there in the world spending $100 on getting her nails done. That's not it. right,
I
Una?
think
You're
that,
talking about something very severe.
yes, right. Yeah, where it's an actual like personality disorder. I mean, I think the
Hmm.
word narcissism has started to get thrown around
Yeah,
a lot in our culture, which, on one hand, I think is fine. There's more awareness around it, and people are starting to have this conversation. On the other hand, everybody is a little bit narcissistic in some sense.
hmm,
Everybody's a little bit self-absorbed, and it's good to have a healthy ego, and honestly, you need to have a healthy ego in order to set healthy boundaries. So it's not, but what we're talking about here are people who really have a personality disorder, where it's really disordered to the point where people who are actual narcissists cannot have a healthy relationship. It's just
right,
basically impossible. And
right.
yet it can be hard to spot them ahead of time. I mean, there are some tells, but most of us, don't necessarily just know offhand what those are unless we learn about it or go through the experience of having a relationship with someone who fits that description, which can be extremely painful and hard to get out of.
Well, in any event, the key to what you're talking about is there are a series of behaviors that happen between two people. And, you can feel it when it feels toxic. You also can feel it when it's abusive. And, what we're talking about today is having people reach out so they can get some help figuring out what it is.
Yeah, because you can read lists all day long on the internet of like, these are the telltale signs of a toxic relationship or blah, blah, blah. And that's great. But at the same time, sometimes you need to actually sit down and talk with someone and get the support and the clarity that only talking to someone else can really provide. Because when you're in that kind of dynamic, it can be extremely hard to see anything clearly. So email me or call me up. But you can email me, get a relationship clarity session by emailing una@unadrake.com. You can check out my website, unadrake.com, and I would love to work with you.
One of the things we're also going to talk about today, and I just want to, review this with you, is we're going to talk about how do we spot a toxic partner? I mean, how can we spot somebody like that even before we're completely engaged? And then once we do, what do we do with our minds where we want to literally, we spot it, we know it, we see it, and we still move towards that person, right? Spot it, see it, and put all of those warning signs aside and full steam ahead. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, Una's going to give us an idea of what some of those characteristics are, how they show up in these relationships, what you should be aware of. And then once you get yourself aware and you don't know what to do, that's when you call her. Let's take a short break. We'll be right back with Una Drake. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dr. Pat. Una Drake is here. So I just want to say out front, all of my exes that are listening to this show, don't call in. I have fessed up to my own crazy as a young woman. I've already fessed up to that on previous shows. So don't be like posting on the Facebook right here or doing any of that crazy right now. I have done my true confessions and I've changed my ways.
Yeah, I've been caught in those cycles as well.
Oh my God. Listen, I'm not preaching from a pulpit. There's no way. I am not a relationship expert. And I certainly am not a relationship expert in my relationships. That is one of the reasons why I'm single right now. Very happy. But I look back and I think to myself, what have I learned? And what am I never going to do again? And I think that part of this is we're talking about how do some people get to the place of being less than great in relationships? It comes from a history. It's passed on, right? It's hard when you see a woman in a grocery store, and I've seen this. It made me crazy in a grocery store, and her child is acting up, a little child, and knocks off the can of peas from the shelf, and the mom just whacks the child. I mean, if you want to see me fly up the aisleway, um, but you have to think for a minute. How was that mom treated? So we're in a gray area here where we're saying to people, this is not where you beat yourself up. This is where you change.
Yeah, absolutely. Because most people who get themselves into a toxic relationship or an abusive relationship, whether they're the abuser or the recipient of the abuse, or even just someone in a codependent relationship, honestly, usually has some sort of history that got them there. Some sort of history where that sort of pattern seemed normal, or at least okay, to the point where they've accepted it and stayed in it. So however, here's the thing though, okay, is that yes, some people, most abusers do have a history of abuse, or a history of something that, hard knocks, or something that, you could use as like an excuse. And that most people partners who stay with abusive partners are like, well, he's just this way because of blah, blah, blah. Or, she wouldn't do that if it weren't for XYZ in her past. I know that he or she is a good person.
Right.
But here's the thing. There's many, many other people who have similar pasts, who have similar things in their history, who choose not to engage in abusive behavior. Ultimately, It comes down to a choice. And especially if you see your partner behaving one way in public, or one way with their boss, or one way with people who have power over them, or whose opinion they care about, and suddenly in those situations, they're able to be, nice or charming or considerate, but at home in private with you, they turn into somebody else, where they're losing their temper, or flying off the handle, or even striking you, or threatening you, or, putting you down, and you feel like it's just like a Mr. Jekyll and Dr. Hyde, or whatever that is. That's a different situation. They obviously have the wherewithal to control themselves. Sometimes you don't need to take it. You don't need to be at the brunt of their lashing out in private. I mean, that's a choice. Ultimately, it's a choice, and you can make excuses for them all day long, or you can say, you know what, I deserve better. And you can.
Well, what do we look for? Let's talk about some of these characteristics. And, a phrase that's getting used now a lot is gaslighting. And let's talk about, what the range of toxic behaviors look like, so that people know what to be on the lookout for.
Sure. Yeah. Well, obviously at the far end would be actual, like, physical intimidation, or actual, abuse. I mean, that's not good in any situation. Lesser, from that would be, you talked about gaslighting. So if that's like, you say that's where someone tells you that reality is different than how you're actually experiencing it. So gaslighting causes you to doubt your own perceptions of reality, and that can be really dangerous in a relationship. So if you're saying, hey, I'm feeling like, I feel such and such in a relationship, or you said such and such, and they said, oh, I didn't say that, or I didn't promise that, or, it's you're just being way too sensitive. I mean, someone say, if your partner's telling you that you're being too sensitive when you're, having a normal emotional reaction to, say, being yelled at, or, being threatened or something like that. And they're saying, oh, you're just overreacting. If they're constantly like putting down your reactions, but you don't, you're not getting that feedback in other areas of your life, say at work or with your friendships and stuff like that, then that could be an indication that you're being gaslighted. Am I being clear here? Because it can be kind of subtle to understand it. I mean,
we're talking about like a total manipulation.
Yeah, it can be, absolutely. So, I mean, gaslighting can take different forms, but basically, if your partner is telling you that essentially that you're crazy, I mean, at some level, I mean, or that you're, not perceiving reality the way that it is, then the temptation is to kind of want to believe your partner and want to then doubt yourself. And the danger there is that then you believe that you're not seeing things the way that they really are. And so then you're much less likely to trust yourself enough to leave a bad situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense, because what it is it's real subtle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? It's real subtle. I don't know if you've ever done this, but I had an experience where I had my sink was dripping, drop, 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 drop. And I remember one day I didn't get it fixed. So the drop, drop, drop is not really a problem when the water can go down. Mm-hmm. But for whatever reason, one day I was doing something and I left the stopper in the sink. So all of a sudden, the drop, drop, drop can completely fill up your sink and overflow. And that's, to me, you've got to be able to see the drop, drop, drops of abuse. Because if they keep coming every day and you have no place for them to go, you don't have your own outlet to release them or move away from them, or there's no signs of hope or change, then what happens is you drown in that level of abuse.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, staying connected to supportive people around you is really important. You had asked earlier about what are some of the telltale signs of a toxic partner or a potentially toxic partner, especially at the beginning of a relationship. Mm-hmm. And, one of those things would be that your partner wants to isolate you from family members or supportive friends, or a classic one is, not wanting you to leave the house very much, or not wanting you to, go and be with other people who have been, supportive in your life. Yeah. I'm thinking of, in a really great relationship, I mean, ideally, you want your partner to, ideally kind of blend in, like with your family, your friends, become integrated into your life instead of being just isolated as just one part of it, but it's easier to maintain a sense of what's real and a sense of your own self if you have other mirrors rather than someone who's abusive. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And who's gaslighting you.
Yeah. And, one of the things, let's do this. Let's skip our break and let's take a moment and make sure that people, one, know how to find out more about you, but how they can receive this clarity session.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Email me, una@unadrake.com, and put clarity or clarity session in the in the subject line. You can just type that into your email, una@unadrake.com, or you can go to my website, and there's like at least two or three, many different ways to email me through my site. Or you can call me on the phone, honestly, 206-491-3555. I'd be happy to talk with you.
Good, great, excellent.
And I'd be happy to do a clarity session with you, because when you're in this dynamic, it's so hard to really see reality fully. It's difficult to have a reality check. And if you don't necessarily have, a network of supportive people that you really trust their opinion and they are good feedback for you, it can be really, really hard. Even if you do have those people in your life, getting out of an abusive relationship can be extremely challenging. And one of the things is because it's like a roller coaster. And so there's these like surges of emotion and chemicals, honestly, that it can become addictive. You can become addictive to almost like the adrenaline rush of that relationship up, down.
And becomes the norm. It becomes the norm to you. I mean, for example, we have a society right now where not getting enough sleep is the norm. So we're comparing ourselves to others in a scenario that is absolutely not great for us. And it becomes the norm. And we start to baseline ourselves against asking our friends. Now, maybe you have a friend in your life that's going to be honest with you. But what you're offering people is a safe space for them to tell their truth. So it leads to this next part. How do you know when to stay and when to go? This is the most difficult, I think, parts, because even people that are in severely abusive relationships have a real tough time leaving. But yet, you should. How do you know when you should stay or go?
Well, that's the $1 million question, but it's not a question that I would recommend that people make at a moment's notice necessarily. I mean, although physical abuse for me is an absolute threshold, if it comes to that, you go, just go. But even with that, a lot of times when a relationship is under the physical abuse threshold, when it's just maybe seems not satisfying or something like that, how do you know? Well, if your relationship constantly seems like it's work, or if it constantly seems like you are less of yourself in that relationship, or if you are editing yourself in order to be in that relationship, those are signs that probably you should go. And if there's a lack of respect in the relationship, if your partner is not showing you respect, or if you at a fundamental level have lost respect for your partner, and I mean, you can try, you can say, okay, what are the circumstances under which I could regain respect for my partner? That could be an interesting exercise. But if it may be that there's just not, or, what is the trust like? What is the quality of trust in the relationship? Do you trust your partner? If you fundamentally do not trust your partner, it could be many, many reasons that you don't. There could have been, past, if your partner cheated on you. I mean, some people recover from that situation and some people don't. Some relationships are able to, they are able to reestablish trust, and sometimes you can't. And that's individual. Like, I can't tell you whether you should trust your partner again. That's for you to decide, and it's not easy. But there's respect, there's trust, there is, if you feel like your relationship is like a roller coaster and you feel like you are walking on eggshells all the time, and it's been that way for, I want to say, like at least 6 months or longer, you should probably consider leaving. I mean, I can't make a blanket statement. I
Right.
need to talk with, individual. I would need to talk with you. So again, email me, una@unadrake.com, put clarity in the subject line. But there's, basic things in a relationship, respect, trust. And then if if your partner is like a different person in, with you than they are in public,
Yeah.
that's a huge deal.
That's a flag. It's a giant flag. It's a flag. And you know why it's a giant flag? Because there's a storyline that goes with it. And I went through this with a partner, so I know this storyline. And the storyline is, well, I'm different in public. I have my public persona. And, and you buy that story and you think, oh, okay, so that's your public persona. Oh, okay, I see. No, you're not married to somebody that's a schizophrenic personality disorder. You're not doing that. It's like, no, if you can be that kind to somebody in the public that you don't know, what is it about this relationship where you can't bring that in our living room?
Right. Yeah. And that comes to sometimes people get latched into like the fantasy of their partner or the fantasy of what they believe that their partner represents, and so they're like, well, I need to be supportive to this person because maybe there's some sort of like greater dream or greater project or something that you feel like you're supporting by supporting that person or supporting the relationship. But ultimately, it really does come down to what is the quality of your relationship with them when no one else is there, when it's just between the two of you. I mean, otherwise, it's just like maybe it's a professional relationship or something else, but it's not that one-on-one love relationship. And because that's what's important. That's the juice of an actual living intimate relationship is the quality between the two of you. And there has to be kindness there. If there's no kindness in a relationship, if there's no quality of like feeling that just that humanity, that it's safe to be weak in a sense. Like we're all human beings. We all have some times when we are weak, when we have our human frailty. And if that feels dangerous to reveal that human weakness, you could say, in a relationship, to be vulnerable. If it's not safe to be vulnerable in your intimate relationship, then you kind of got to go. I mean, you can't stay in that situation very long. I mean, you either your partner has to work on themselves or you have to work together in order to build trust and then, the ability to be intimate, the ability to be vulnerable in that relationship, or you got to go. And I'd say you can work on it for some time, and sometimes it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, the working on it is when both parties really want to take a look and really want to do the work. And lines of communication are open, and you're able to seek outside help, and you're willing to commit to that, and you're willing to commit to the relationship because, people do go through that. They do go through bumps in the road. That's not what we're talking about here when we talk about leaving. We're clearly talking about a scenario where even after it's made known, neither party is going to do something different about it. Or if you're the party that doesn't want that level of verbal abuse, passive aggressive behavior, whatever that thing is, then you do have to really consider leaving. Because the one thing I think that we're talking about, there's only one person in the equation that we can change. And that's us. That's the person we can change.
Yeah.
We cannot change the other person. You can peel the skin off an apple and it's an apple without its skin, but it's still an apple. And, what we're talking about here is every one of us has had to face ourselves in our lives. I know I have. And I've had to look and say, who is the person that I want to become? And who can I find to help me get there? And boy, I think that's worth saying. Those are the questions that we have to ask ourselves when we're in relationship.
Yeah. And I think, I think that both partners in a healthy relationship, will change over time. Because everybody is growing and changing throughout their lifetime. So, hopefully it's obvious that in a long-term relationship, both partners will change over time. But the hope is that you can grow together, or at least that there's acceptance and acceptance of the other person as you change, or that your partner can accept you as you change and grow in that relationship. I mean,
exactly.
If people get together, in their early 20s, they're not going to be the same, in their life when they're 40. They're just not.
But we're talking about growing together in a progressive, positive way. We're talking about positive change. That's really the change we're talking about that you're able to work through.
Right.
Wow. What a great show. Thank you, Una. Thank you for today. One last question. Again, how can people find out more about you? But also, tell us about the clarity session.
Yeah. Well, in the relationship clarity session, I'll help you get really clear on what is happening in your relationship on a number of different levels. I have a tool that I use to help people look at relationships and to get at the meat of what's going on and what's good, what are the good things about it, and what are the things that could use some improvement. So that with that, at the end of the clarity session, it's typically about half an hour long. You'll have a lot more clarity on the state of your relationship and what of your needs are being met in the relationship, what needs are not being met, and what are some specific steps that you could take to improve the relationship or get your needs met within that relationship, or at least ask for what you need in the relationship. Because of course that's you need to be able to know your own needs and then be able to communicate those needs to your partner. And then your partner can choose to either, help meet those needs or not, and you can do the same for your partner. So it's about knowing yourself. And that's what the clarity session is about, to help know yourself and to get clear on what's happening in the relationship and then take steps to move forward.
Yeah, and get some absolutely objective help in it. That's the key. Trusting, loving, objective help from Una. Una, thank you so much for today. Awesome.
Thank you, Dr. Pat.
This is one of the most important topics as we move forward in our workplaces. We're starting to see trends, more and more trends of people really experiencing horrific situations. Please take the time to know yourself. Please take the time to learn about yourself and do that with Una. Made herself available to all of you. Thank you for tuning us in, turning us on. We have another hour coming up on Transformation Talk Radio.